I always do this. Right. Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted number 3. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And in what is a bit of an alliterative mouthful, this week we've got Belgium Bishop Bonny, who claims that Pope Francis approves of blessing for same-sex couples. So here we are again, Mark and Gavin, dealing with the ambiguity of the Pope, because we're not sure whether the Pope does in fact approve of these disordered relationships. But this is what Bishop Bonny is saying, and we are waiting to hear what the Pope has to say. So what are we to make of this, Mark?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it follows directly on from the German synodal way. Bishop Bonny, one of the Flemish bishops who's issued this blessing, very controversially, is in Germany, and he's given an interview to a German news site where he's basically said that, you know, he's putting forward the idea that the Pope knows about what they're doing, and he agrees with it. And you have to say that this is a repeated behaviour from Pope Francis, where we've seen with the Amoris Laetitia, for example, there was a surreptitious footnote inserted which alluded to something which, you know, obviously defenders of the Pope were saying, oh no, it doesn't mean that. And then instead of clarifying what it actually meant, there were dubia issued by cardinals, which is a normal thing that happens when there's a point of clarity to be made. The Pope refused to answer the dubia, which is unprecedented. And instead of that, he sort of co-opted the Argentinian bishops and the Maltese bishops to write a series of guidelines which affirmed the problematic teaching which he was pushing in that document. And it seems very much that we've got the same thing going on here. There was a CDF ruling. Germany said that put this forward, this same thing forward a few months ago, and the CDF ruled that it was not allowed, it was not to be allowed. The Flemish bishops have gone ahead and published their proposals despite that CDF ruling. So you've kind of got this chaos ensuing in the church where it seems very much that the Pope is pushing one agenda. I mean, otherwise, why are these guys doing it? They're, you know, widely, it's believed that, you know, this is pushing us towards schism, which is a massive problem.
I think probably one of the things.
Oh, there he is.
Well, I was doing that difficult thing that not very intelligent people have to do from time to time, and that is lining up my thoughts in my head and trying to decide which order they should be presented in. But the first thing I wanted to say is we're going to be quite careful in our language today. We're going to be using some Catholic language and very often using the word disorderly. And we hope that you'll know what we mean by it, because YouTube has terms and conditions, and we want to avoid breaching them. But this is as much a discussion about authority as it is about sex. Basically, we think you know what's going on with the sex, but we want to talk more about the authority. And the difficulty here is that the Catholic Church is lagging behind what the Protestant churches have done. So for those of us who've been Protestants for a long time, we've seen all this before. We know what the tricks are. We know how the sleight of hand works. We know which cup the smarty is found under after a 3 move very swiftly in a magical trick. And it's very painful to see it being done because it's just so completely obvious. So one of the things that we're discovering is that the sources of authority for the church are being undermined. And they are, of course, the Bible and tradition. Now, Protestants don't have much tradition. They get to reinvent it regularly, but Catholics have the magisterium. And one of the things we found is that Cardinal Ratzinger, of blessed memory, had something very important to say about the magisterium. Katherine, you dug this out. It was really very powerful. Perhaps you could, this is the moment to share it.
Yeah, I think this is one of the problems in the Catholic Church, is a misunderstanding about what the magisterium is, or a misunderstanding about sources of authority and what we mean by authority. So we talked in another episode about the infallibility of the Pope, and that doesn't mean that everything the Pope says is infallible. If the Pope were to say tea is a better drink than coffee, that wouldn't make that an infallible statement. So things that the Pope is quoted as having said on a plane, for example, don't need to be taken as infallible. So it's under very certain and specific conditions, which Mark can elaborate on in just a moment. But so the church we look at as like a three-legged stool. We have sacred tradition, sacred scripture, and the magisterium, and we need all three, or it falls apart, it falls away. It's not sola scriptura, or it's not only scripture. It's a bit like, to use a weak analogy, but one that might help, it's a bit like students who go to a school at the start of secondary school, and they have a load of textbooks, and in the textbooks is all the information they need, and it really is all there. But we don't just give them the books and say, come back in 5 years and sit an exam. They enroll in a class and they're guided and led by a teacher who shares the information, elucidates it, makes it clear, but doesn't deviate from what it is that they need to know and understand. So Christ, knowing who we are, what we're like, our nature, is that we need that institution, we need that guidance, that deposit of faith, that authority, that visible authority. We need that to guide us so that we don't err. But that, as Mark said in a previous conversation, the Pope, the bishops, the magisterium is only authoritative insofar as it keeps to that constant teaching and perhaps finds new ways to express it, but doesn't deviate from it. Pope Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger in 1986, on this very day that we're recording, on the 1st of October, wrote a letter to the bishops on pastoral care and said this: "We wish to make it clear that departure from the Church's teaching or silence about it in an effort to provide pastoral care is neither caring nor pastoral. Only what is true can ultimately be pastoral." And so we shouldn't be looking to deviate from scripture, from tradition, but only to look at the constant teaching and say, how can it be expressed at this time?
You know, Benedict, but Mark, sorry if I'm jumping in front of you, but Benedict was so clear there. One of the things that I found is, as I've been talking about orderly and disorderly love, is that the moment somebody says they know somebody who has disorderly affections, the next thing is we have to affirm them, we have to love them, we have to accept them as they are. And your idea that this is wrong in principle is an unloving thing to say. So first of all, this always constitutes to some extent a degree of a moral blackmail. It means that, but then, you know, this is the beginning of the victory of the victim always. So what Benedict is saying there is that there are principles of revealed truth, things that the church should know, and we should not be subject to blackmail. And if you think you're offering pastoral care, you're doing the loving thing by softening the church's teaching because people need it or are helped by it, or it meets what they require. You're making a very big mistake. But that's exactly the sociological trajectory in our therapeutic culture that people have followed, and they get very cross with you and consider you're deeply unloving if you don't give in to the blackmail.
What a massive irony it is when you think about the way that our faith is about coming before Christ, having humility and trying to learn the lessons that Jesus is teaching us. And this attitude is almost the opposite of that. It's trying to twist what Jesus said or what the church has always understood and make it fit your own narrative or a modern secular narrative. And I think that really worries me. It really worries me that because it basically is saying fundamentally, I can't see how you can reconcile that without saying, well, Jesus failed. You know, Jesus wasn't the Son of God. The message for 2,000 years, the church has got it wrong, that there is no magisterium. You're throwing all of that away by accepting this. And yeah, it's hard. Like loads of things are hard. And like you said, Gavin, you know, we're all a bit disordered, aren't we? That's sort of the whole point of being Christian, you know, is that we're trying to get ourselves ordered by, you know, being close to Christ, becoming closer and closer to Christ.
Well, there are no-go areas for God. We can't say, here I am, Lord, mold me as you like, but leave my sex life or my romantic life or my romantic attachments alone. They all have to be offered. But I think it's got something to do with, this is a bit of an ugly phrase, but the sacramentalization of the erotic and the romantic. So the Protestant trick, the first time it came to me, was to use Galatians 5 and the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, and say when two people fell in love, whatever their natural profile, the fact that they loved one another was demonstrated by a growth in the fruit of the Spirit. This is a really very bad piece of exegesis, because what they really meant was there was a certain amount of happiness when these two people fell in love, and they mistook that human happiness for spiritual progress. But it isn't at all. And the real difference is this: human happiness, secular happiness, biological, psychological happiness evaporates under pressure very quickly. So all the things, if you like, in the old man, the old flesh, the sub-Christian nature, they look very good, but the moment you put them under pressure, like insult them, just try insulting me in public as I'm driving my car, and that will show you how shallow a Christian I am, because I have to work enormously hard to be humble and to turn the other cheek and not choose a whole. So I'm under no illusions about my sub-Christian fruit of the Spirit. It's very thin ground, but actually the Christian, the development of Christ in us is a point where it's very hard to. It goes right against the grain. This constant forgiveness, constant humility, not responding with pride and anger. These are very difficult things. And these are not produced by two people loving each other. They may be happy for a bit until they then start having to forgive each other and the misunderstandings set in. But the idea that falling in love and having sexual intimacy is of itself a piece of spiritual advance is terribly shallow. And what it suggests is that, and it gives to falling in love and sexual intimacy a false status, the status almost of the sacrament. And that's exactly what the Protestant religion is. And they're very cross with us because effectively we're criticizing their idol. The idol is this, how does one sum it up most of all? Finding some temporary intimacy and affirmation in romance and sex with another person. Actually, that's not what Jesus came to give us. He came to set us free from sin and judgment, from hell, and to allow our souls to be transformed. It's got nothing to do with romantic love or sex at all.
I wish I could take notes as we're going along now.
Yeah,
There are a couple of really important things. I think one of the things that you said there about the spiritual dimension to our sexuality, I think that is a real, like, you're without disagreeing exactly with what you were saying, I think that there is a spiritual dimension to our sexuality, which is the thing that causes us a problem in a way, because where it's become meaningless, those relationships have become meaningless, or a manner of acquiring some sort of physical pleasure. The damage is a spiritual damage that's done through fornication or whatever.
So I could wax lyrical on this because I'm very fond of Teresa of Avila, and one of the things she does is she writes with an overlap about sex and spirituality that some people consider quite dangerous. But I think one of the ways I'm very sympathetic to that. It's a dangerous ride, and I'm sympathetic to it. But one of the ways we can deal with it, I think, is to talk either about an end in itself or a means to an end. So there are some very deep and profound and beautiful things we can say about sensuality and sexuality, and if we were to go that far, about I'm not going to go that far. but if we say that they are means to an end, and the end is Christ, the end is a deepening of our relationship in Christ, then I think that gives a certain amount of safety to it. But in our culture, certainly James Martin and the Flemish bishop, they've removed that end, and they're saying these are ends, and the means becomes an end of its own. Yeah. And that's when it becomes dangerous. And that's when it's very dangerous to talk about the spirituality of sexuality, if the sexuality is the end in itself, instead of theosis, our being immersed in the life of the Trinity. So that's a test we all have to ask ourselves: is what I'm doing bringing me closer to a closer, more intimate relationship and surrender with Christ, or is it deepening what I want in life because it makes me feel better and cheers me up?
Yeah.
The other thing is that we're back to the dictatorship of relativism again, aren't we? Because what we're saying is that we're in a paradigm now that where emotions trump realities, and that the most important thing, you know, basically is, am I summing it up correctly, that what you're saying is that the argument in Protestant circles seems to be, well, my feelings are more important than anything else, and therefore I should be allowed to act according to those feelings. There never seems to be any sort of analysis of the repercussions of the, you know, these decisions, does there? You know, that your choices have consequences. I think that always seems to be left out of that.
I think a big problem is that lack of focus on the finality that Gavin spoke about. So there's a couple of things here. One is that as Christians, we see a person's humanity before we see their fallenness. We're all fallen, we're all broken, we're all weak, we live in a fallen world, and we all have a cross to bear, and that cross is different for me as it is to you, but we all have one. And for some people that may be a disordered inclination, a disordered attraction, but they themselves are not, you know, their humanity, they are made in the image and likeness of God. And I think that's what's beautiful about our Catholic theology, about our Catholic faith, is that we say we don't reduce you to what you do, but we look at you as a person and we say you are called to so much more. You are called to this to be this wonderful child of God, and for you may have to carry this particular cross, and for someone else it will be this. But I think that speaks to a lack of faith in the supernatural, because actually, if we really believe in a God and we trust that he's created us in his image, and he wants to raise us up and call us to something that will be beautiful and will bring us joy, and we put our faith in that, then I think it becomes easier to make sacrifices and say, well, I trust you, God. It feels really difficult. It doesn't feel like it's what I want to do, but I trust you. And if you just say, actually, there isn't really a God and there is no big plan, and actually the sum total of everything is how you feel, then of course you're going to reject it and say, well, this doesn't make me feel good. So
surely that's a kind of idolatry as well. Like, you know, what we're talking about here is, instead of having the Imago Dei at the center of who we are, this ideology is attempting to put our feelings, our sexual urges, if you like, that is what makes you who you are. I mean, would you agree? That seems to me a key insight when we're talking about this topic, is that, you know, it's putting, like, how on earth can you put your urges at the center of what and who you are? It doesn't make any sense, does it?
Well, by calling them love, there are a number of tricks that they played on us. So the first trick that is, I mean, you've gone right to the bullseye. It's to call an urge love. It's to confuse eros and agape, and this should be cue Katherine to tell us what this is really all about. But if I can just finish the sentence before I lose my train of thought, before Katherine tells us this important, deepens our understanding. The other trick they played on us is to define ourselves by our urges. So, I mean, if I, you know, in any public space, I say, hi, I'm Gavin, and I'm a straight man with turbulent sexual longings, then people would say, excuse me, we don't want to know about that.
Oh, God.
But that's right. but
too much information, Gavin.
Too much information. Well, but you see, but that's the whole thing. That's exactly what we've been lured into. Too much information. When I meet someone, I don't want to know where they are on the disorderly or orderly scale. It's too much information, and not only that, but I don't see people as defined by their urges. I see them as baptized or non-baptized children of God that God wants to draw into his image. And the problem we've got, and we've lost round one very badly, or round 2 and 3, is that in the secular language, we now have to talk about people by again, sacramentalizing that urge, as if the most important thing about our humanity is who we want to sleep with or have sex with. I mean, actually, from time to time, the mask slips and they stop talking about love and they just talk about sex, which is, in the end, I think, what it is. But
we've seen that creeping into, and this is one of the problems, isn't it? Is that we've seen this creeping into the language, like the synodal language in 2018. There was a big argument between the cardinals when they tried to introduce the alphabet euphemism, you know, thing, and basically that like, as we've just sort of had a discussion around the anthropology, which is, you know, very simply put, that we put Christ at the center of who and what we are, we don't put our urges at the center of who and what we are. So to try and adopt that sort of euphemism is deeply problematic for Catholics. And so there were 13 cardinals who wrote, you know, to the synod governing body to sort of talk about why that shouldn't be done. The point is that we see the church trying to sort of accommodate these ideas. Exactly as you said, Gavin, it's a bit of a shell game, isn't it?
Well, sorry, Katherine.
Go on.
I just want to say that alphabetitis is a very serious problem, and I was hoping Mark would then take us towards epistemology. But Katherine, you go.
I was just going to say, I also fear that we can sound like we're saying, look, you know, love is really this drudge, this sacrifice. It's got nothing to do with feeling, and that isn't really it. It's saying you don't idolize feeling, you don't emphasize it above all else, but actually it's that love, that agape, that sort of when one makes a sacrifice for the other and the other sacrifices, it's that in that mutuality, then you find this total flourishing. And we're not saying you've got to have this cold-headed, like emotionless act of will. It's saying, Lord, I want to conform my will to yours because I know that you created me and know me better than I know myself. And that if I do, that you will enrich my life, that I will flourish. It's like a child playing in the sea. You know, this is love, this uprush of love. It isn't cold and callous and calculated, but at the same time, it isn't only and merely driven by feeling. So
it's not really about your genitals. It's not. It's the genitalization of all this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Extraordinary, you know.
Yeah. So actually, we're doing the very thing that people say we're not doing. We're not reducing it to just mechanics. We're saying it's so much richer. It's so much deeper. It's so much more beautiful. And you can have deep and rich and beautiful friendships. Nobody's disputing that. But that we have to recognise that there is an end to the way in which we are created as male and female complementary. Someone else say it clearer. And that is the end that we work towards, and that is the natural family, the mother, the father, the raising of children.
So another question then is like this idea that you know, this is how I feel and how you know, this is what I want to do, and there's nothing else I want to do. And I always think, but like, you know, you could say the same thing about any relationship, couldn't you? You could say, you know, I like sleeping with ladies, therefore I want to sleep with as many ladies as I possibly can. But like, you know, there has to be a line. So it makes a mockery of the hashtag love is love. I mean, it's very easy to show what a load of absolute rubbish that is, isn't it? You know, because it's quite plainly.
It is. Well, most men know that it's complete rubbish, but it's very difficult. It's such a powerful tagline that it's extremely difficult to repudiate it in 3 words. I mean, they have the advice, you know, the moment you acknowledge that love is a powerful tagline, how do you find 3 words to repudiate it? The best you can do is to make it 4 words. Love is not always love. That's 5 words. But one of the things that would be the better way of doing it. But one of the things that happened in my lifetime is the swinging of a pendulum. When I was young, duty was a form of love. So I was brought up with, was it Titus Oates? Oates, anyway, Captain Oates, on his Antarctic expedition with Scott, knowing that that he was going to delay and jeopardize the lives of his friends. So I'm going out, I may be some time. And that was his duty, his self-sacrifice was a way of loving his companions, who then made it back without being burdened by him. And then during my lifetime, that all changed, and the love expressed through self-sacrifice and duty was replaced by narcissistic self-indulgence as a whole therapy movement, and the whole Jungian quest for self-authentication took place. One of the things we have to do, as well as stop pretending that love is love and that genitals rule, is to begin to reintroduce to people the beauty of self-sacrifice as a form of loving, which is at the heart of being a Christian. Unless we are willing to accept the beauty and the importance of self-sacrifice, we can't begin to follow Jesus, because the qualifications are, unless you pick up your cross, you can't follow me. So that there's a during my lifetime, this huge revolution in values has taken place, and Christianity has lost out and been turned on its head. We have to find a way of breaking through the narcissism in order to redefine what love is.
Should we talk about how they're doing it? Like, should we talk about, I mean, the recent thing with Walter Brugmeyer, who was being promoted. So yeah, like we were saying, we were having a little chat before this session, weren't we, where we were saying that I think in the 80s and 90s, the way that Protestant theologians were approaching this was by saying that, oh, that's not what the Bible means, by taking the boo-text, if you like, and sort of trying to use an eisegesis to say that they didn't mean what they clearly did mean. But that's really interestingly changed now. You've got this essay by Brugmeyer being pushed by Father James Martin, who obviously is being promoted by Pope Francis to Vatican spokesman or media personality on this issue extraordinarily. And even though he's been condemned by Archbishop Chaput and, like a lot of what has been said has been debunked online. I mean, one of the best people, if anyone wants to look at, is Trent Horn, who is on YouTube, who very intelligently and very carefully picks apart, what's being taught there. But this new sort of approach now is not to try and discredit the text in the Bible. It's, James Martin quite openly says, yeah, no, the Bible does condemn, clearly condemns it. And which goes along with the 2,000 years of history. So it's almost like he's trying to get around it that way. But instead he says that the gospel is not the same as the Bible, so he's separating the gospel message from scripture and trying to say that the two things are a different thing.
And the heresies are always the same. They're the same heresies coming back, because this is Marcion. Marcion says, let's just deal with the gospel and cut out all that awkward stuff before it, especially the Old Testament. And because people don't understand the Old Testament, which is the covenant within which Jesus lived, the incarnation took place within it, from which neither a jot or a tittle is going to pass away. So we better understand it. And everyone majors on the battles and the aggression and an angry God, and because they haven't read it. But when you read the Old Testament, what you discover is this wonderful experiment in forming a nation in holiness. And so all the way, and again, I'm so cross at this nasty trick of insisting on inclusion and non-divisiveness, when actually the whole of the Old Testament is a study in exclusion and divisiveness, because you're excluding that which is going to pollute and destroy, and you're dividing because you have to divide between good and evil. And so the great project of the Old Testament is teaching the people of God to divide their lives between the holy and the unholy. So they even cook separately. Even cooking is divided up between different forms of doing it. And the reason this matters is because when we come to Jesus, we already have a platform of holiness and unholiness, and sexuality falls into holiness or unholiness. And so the natural sexuality of a man and a woman having a children, being married for life, is actually holy. And all the other stuff is unholy. And of course, just like us, they said, well, but life's more complicated than that, because it is. So they said, let's try and find the exceptions. And that was where Shammai and Hillel came in. They had the liberal and the conservative school of thought, even at the time of Jesus. And he was asked to arbitrate on it, and he refused and simply always said, let's go back to the principles of holiness and unholiness. And this is quite difficult, because that means that we all have to work out the exceptions as we go along. And that's very painful, and wonderfully, that's where the church comes to help us. But the James Martin thing, we can distinguish gospel from Bible, is just Marcionite, the Marcionite heresy, all over again. Only if you put the whole thing within the trajectory of this discovery of holiness and unholiness, sacred and secular, can you begin to understand what God's doing with us. And that means learning the basics of what falls into the sacred bit and what falls into the non-sacred bit.
Yeah, it's all that attempt to pick what suits. We know that the New Testament lies hidden in the Old, and the Old is revealed in the New. You can't separate them. Another quote from Pope Benedict was, the Church's doctrine on this and all issues is not based on isolated phrases. that's not how it works. You don't pick a phrase, you don't examine it, and then it's a whole picture, it's a whole story of salvation history, and we can't reject the bits that are difficult or uncomfortable.
There's a great exegesis. One of the things that you often hear is, oh, Jesus never said that, which obviously is, you know, Jesus didn't talk about nuclear weapons, therefore,
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So you can't have an opinion, a biblical opinion, which obviously is complete nonsense. But this is a particular topic that, you know, I think that's often thrown out, that Jesus never mentioned this. Well, read Matthew 19 is what I'd say.
But
read it carefully, you know, and with an open heart, and you'll see what Jesus has to say about it. Perhaps we'll put some of these links, Catherine, in the.
I will. I'm going to put some links because we spoke about some earlier as well. But I think that just to pick up on that, because I think that's just a really quick and important point. And I think this is where the prophetic voice of the church we can see. And I think a good example of that is Humanae Vitae, where at the time in the 60s, this introduction of the reproductive pill seemed like it was only good. And almost surprising to everyone, the church came in and said, we foresee problems down the line, and people were saying, no, don't be ridiculous. And now we've got a 50-60 year experiment. We see the results, and the church was right, not because Jesus taught about a contraceptive pill or hormone injections, but because he's God and he understands human nature, and the church has been given that authority to teach what is right and how we are to be as humans. And so it doesn't matter if there's no mention of abortion or nuclear weapons or the contraceptive pill. The point is the church will speak to human nature and does know humans, because God knows humans and created us. And so we pay attention, and we don't pay attention at our peril.
Oh, good. Can I quickly say something? This is really important, because this is why I became a Catholic. I spent all of my life scorning Humanae Vitae, scorning, you know, all the normal secular reservations about contraception. How can the Catholics be so stupid? How can they be so prudish? How can they be so fundamentalist? Stupid Catholics causing all this trouble with their overreactions against sexuality. And I was utterly taken with the secular approach. And only as I've got older have I begun to understand how many of the disastrous implications of the way in which we've mishandled sexuality, in which sex has become recreational, stem from the pill and from contraception. It wasn't, I have to say, in my own defense, it wasn't altogether clear in the 60s and perhaps the 70s, but certainly by the 80s it should have been. It took me another 40 years, I'm afraid. But the things that have made me very happy to be a Catholic are the discovery that Humanae Vitae was such an important teaching, that celibacy was important. You know, which organization has taken sex, which has blown up in our faces in the form of kind of a nuclear holocaust, has taken it seriously enough to contain and constrain it? Answer: only the Catholic Church with its teaching of celibacy. And you keep on hearing people say, well, if they would only reduce that or water it down, perhaps people would behave in a better way. But of course, it's got nothing to do with that. Celibacy turns out to be one of the few restraints that any organization ever has put in the place of this voracious creature that's eating us alive. And then the last thing, of course, is abortion. I had no idea what the scale of abortion was, nor had I any idea that metaphysically one might be feeding dark gods with child sacrifices in a way that changes the whole metaphysical balance of our situation. I had no idea that by practicing abortion, child sacrifice on the scale that we had, that we might actually be feeding evil and strengthening it just at the very time that the protection of baptism and grace and sacramentalism was being reduced as Christendom changed. And so only Catholicism has spoken clearly about these things. And I'm just sorry it's taken me to the end of my life to understand that the church's teaching was true and real and proved an antidote to human turmoil and disintegration.
And that's what I love about.
I was going to say, I think it's wonderful that you know, that the church does teach clearly on these things, which is why I get so cross when you know, sort of, there seems to be so much confusion. Thanks, Bishop Bonny. Yeah, like the only other thing I don't know whether it's worth talking about, you know, Rowan Williams and the Lambeth Council. You know, Rowan Williams recently acknowledged that so the Lambeth Council, what was it, in 1890, was it 1910?
Lambeth Conference, yeah.
Yeah, the Lambeth Conference. So they took away, they allowed contraception, basically, didn't they?
It was 1930s.
Yeah, and Rowan Williams recently acknowledged that once you divorce what the Catholic Church teaches, the unitive and the procreative ends of marriage are completely joined together. Once you separate those, then it's very difficult not to say any form of sexual activity is, completely illicit, isn't it?
Yes,
I think it stands and falls on our response to contraception.
And that's why this is such a problem for the church, because it's like they're trying to sell it as reaching out to the peripheries and all this stuff. But if they dismantle this, it's such a fundamental thing. How are we, if you understand catechesis, so many building blocks will tumble down like a Jenga tower if they take this out. And they don't even seem to understand the faith. That's what worries me.
That's right. Every time it's mentioned in the public space, they say, "Oh, but guess what? 75% of American Catholics don't believe in the contraception is a problem." And you have to say, yeah, and that they're not Catholics. I mean, they may not be Christians. They may have grown up in, but if they don't, it's not just about obeying a rule. It's understanding why the rule is there and how it describes human behavior and how your own behavior should be interpreted through the principle that lay behind the rule. There isn't any sense of that at all. It's a rule. No one cares about it. Therefore, so let's get rid of it.
Yeah, but it's about assenting, isn't it? It's about assenting to that. And it's like, well, so what if 99% you're not God? We need revelation. If we didn't need revelation, then of course we can just say, well, it feels okay to me, or I think it's fine. If the church teaches this, the church is right. If you think differently, you're wrong.
None of us would create Christianity as a religion. I mean, I would never sign up for a religion that made me forgive my enemies 70 times 7. It's just too darn difficult. And then, it's a scourge of my happiness and life. I would prefer to take revenge on them or ignore them. But the idea I have actively forgive them, I wouldn't make a religion like this, except that because of it, I discovered that God forgives me 70 times 7. So my forgiveness, which I need more than anything else, depends upon this rule that I then have to implement on behalf of others. But I wouldn't have invented it. I'd have chosen something much cozier and more congenial.
But also, this is why we need the rock of our faith, and it is a steadfast rock. We don't want something blowing in the wind, because it's that rock that can say in Nazi Germany, when homosexuals are being killed, it's wrong. It is objectively wrong. You cannot kill these people. They are made in the image and likeness of God, whilst at the same time saying that are wrong. That's a church that is a rock that can say both things at the same time. We defend the person. We will always defend the person, but we will not accept these acts. And so therefore, it doesn't matter what culture you live in. It doesn't matter if at the time homosexuality happens to be popular or not. You know, in the image of God, and your life will be protected and preserved.
Well said. End rant.
Well,
okay. Have we done everything?
I don't know.
Well, that was all right. I thought we got right into it there, didn't we?
Oh, don't end with me saying that. Someone else might say something else.
I thought, well, Mark did. We got right into it. Very good. Give Mark the last word. That was very good. Oh. You've been listening to.
Tell us what the magisterium is, Mark.
The teaching authority of the teaching authority of the church. Yeah, I think we covered it all. Yeah. Nice one.
We'll be back.
We'll be back.
There'll be more. Okay, for now, thanks for listening. You've been listening to me, Katherine Bennett.
Me, Mark Lambert.
And me, Gavin Ashenden, Catholic Unscripted, number 3. Thanks for joining us. By the way, please comment freely and like and share.
And subscribe. Bye.
Subscribe.